Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're voyaging to one of the most isolated, enigmatic, and hauntingly beautiful places on Earth, an island adrift in the vast Pacific, home to colossal stone guardians that have puzzled humanity for centuries. We're talking about Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, and its iconic Moai statues. This isn't just a story of ancient engineering. It's a tale of ambition, collapse, and incredible resilience. So, before we set sail for this remote corner of history, take a moment to like this video and hit that subscribe button, but only if you genuinely enjoy these deep dives into the world's greatest mysteries. And, as always, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see our global community joining us. Now, dim those lights. Maybe get a fan humming softly in the background. And let's ease into tonight's incredible journey to the land of the silent giants. Rapa Nui, better known to the outside world as Easter Island, sits in the middle of the South Pacific, over 2,000 miles from the nearest continental shore. Isolated, windswept, and hauntingly quiet, the island measures only about 63 square miles, but it holds one of the greatest enigmas of ancient engineering, the Moai statues. There are nearly 1,000 of them, towering stone figures with heavy brows, long noses, and pursed lips, all standing or fallen across the island. Most face inland, their backs turned to the sea, as though watching over the land. Many are half buried in the earth, their full bodies hidden beneath centuries of soil. Others lie in quarries, partially carved, abandoned mid-creation. Their very presence provokes wonder, awe, and 100 unanswered questions. Why were they built? Who carved them? How were they moved? And why did the people who created them eventually stop? These are the mysteries that have haunted explorers, archaeologists, and storytellers for generations. To outsiders, Easter Island seemed like a riddle frozen in volcanic stone. But to the Rapa Nui people, the island is no mystery at all. It's home. The Moai are not relics of a lost civilization. They are their ancestors. Though the first written accounts came from Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen in 1722, the history of the island stretches back centuries earlier. When Polynesian voyagers, navigating by the stars and waves, first settled this remote paradise, they named it Rapa Nui, meaning Great Rapa, and built a society rooted in deep spiritual tradition, clan identity, and a sacred connection between the living and the dead. The Moai were carved not as idols to be worshipped, but as living vessels of ancestral mana, spiritual energy. Each one represented a deified chief or important ancestor, standing watch over their descendants. The statues weren't just art, they were guardians, mediators between the heavens and the soil. But time, like the sea, is relentless. By the time European sails appeared on the horizon, the island's society had changed. The statues were toppled, the forests were gone, and what remained was a whisper of what once stood tall. And so Rapa Nui became a question mark in stone, its meaning not lost, but buried under centuries of silence. What do you think it must have felt like for those first Polynesian settlers to arrive on such an isolated piece of land? Long before the Moai stood sentry over the island's hills, the land was untouched, lush, forested, and silent, with only the cries of seabirds echoing over its volcanic slopes. Then, sometime between 800 and 1200 CE, a fleet of Polynesian canoes arrived. These voyagers, masters of the ocean, had navigated thousands of miles using nothing but the stars, ocean swells, and the flight patterns of birds. They came from the Marquesas, or Mangariva, bringing with them not just people, but pigs, chickens, taro, bananas, and sweet potatoes, everything needed to build a new world. To land on Rapa Nui was to touch the edge of the earth. It is one of the most remote inhabited islands on the planet, and yet these settlers brought with them a fully formed culture, elaborate social structures, oral history, deep spiritual beliefs, and a tradition of monumental stonework. Over time, The island was divided into clans, each controlling different territories, and each anchored by a sacred ancestor figure, an idea that would soon be immortalized in stone. The early Rapa Nui people thrived. Archaeological evidence shows they built villages, cultivated crops in rock gardens to trap moisture, and raised chickens in stone enclosures. Their society was highly organized, ruled by ariki, chiefs, who wielded both political and spiritual authority. Life on the island revolved around the worship of ancestors, who were believed to influence everything from harvests to weather. This ancestral reverence would eventually manifest in the most iconic way possible: the carving of the Moai. It's important to understand that Rapa Nui was not a lost or primitive culture. It was deeply sophisticated, adapted to its harsh and limited environment, and built on a strong sense of continuity between the living and the dead. The settlers brought more than tools. They brought meaning, and it was this spiritual worldview that shaped the decision to begin carving giants. But for now, in these early centuries, the island was in balance. Forests still covered the land. The sea provided fish. The soil was rich. The first Moai was still generations away, but the foundation had been laid both culturally and spiritually for what would become one of the most extraordinary sculptural legacies on Earth. The story had only just begun. All right, if you're already captivated by the mystery of Rapa Nui, please give this video a like. It helps spread these incredible stories. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider doing it now so you don't miss what's coming next. At the heart of Rapa Nui's sacred geography lies Rano Raraku, a volcanic crater with steep slopes and soft, carvable stone. It was here that the majority of the island's Moai were born, not from legend or myth, but from painstaking craftsmanship. The rock used was volcanic tuff, a compressed ash stone that was relatively soft and ideal for carving, at least in its early stages. Over time, exposure to the elements would harden the statues into their familiar, weathered state. Rano Raraku wasn't just a quarry. It was a spiritual workshop, a place of pilgrimage, sweat, and sacred labor. Out of its cliff faces and hillsides, the Rapa Nui sculptors carved hundreds of Moai, some still half-finished, others completed but never transported. Today, nearly 400 statues remain at the site, frozen mid-process like the workers simply vanished. Carving a Moai was not a casual affair. Each statue was commissioned by a clan to honor a specific ancestor, usually a powerful chief. The designs followed a symbolic formula: an elongated face, heavy brow, long ears, and a prominent nose. The body was often barely indicated, with arms pressed against the torso and fingers carved in thin, stylized relief. The Moai ranged in size from modest 6-footers to the colossal El Gigante, an unfinished statue over 70 feet tall and weighing an estimated 150 tons. Carvers used handheld tools made of hard basalt, a much tougher volcanic rock chipped into chisels and axes. The process took months, even years, requiring teams of artisans who passed down their knowledge through generations. As they worked, the Moai remained connected to the rock wall. Only when nearly complete would they be detached, slid downhill, and prepared for transport. What makes Rana Raraku so haunting today is the sheer number of statues still embedded in the earth. Many appear half-buried, but in fact they are full-bodied figures whose lower halves have been swallowed by soil over centuries of erosion. It creates the eerie illusion that the Moai are sinking, when in truth they've been standing patiently, neck-deep in time. This crater was the womb of the island's giants, and it was here that stone and spirit met, where human hands shaped volcanic ash into eternal ancestors. One of the most intriguing features of the Moai is not how they were carved, but where they look. Nearly every Moai statue on Rapa Nui faces inland, away from the ocean. This was no accident. The Moai weren't meant to watch the waves. They were watching the people. Each statue stood on the stone platform called an ahu, a ceremonial site that served both as a foundation and often as a burial place for the individual the Moai represented. These ahu dotted the island's coastlines like spiritual outposts, anchoring each clan's territory and pointing toward the heart of their communities. The Moai, in essence, stood as guardians, embodying powerful ancestors who watched over the villages and offered spiritual protection. To the Rapa Nui people, the Moai were more than sculptures. They were living presences, containers of mana, a sacred energy believed to reside in gods, chiefs, and revered dead. Once erected, a moai was thought to channel mana into the land, ensuring fertility, good harvests, and the well-being of the clan. They weren't just memorials. They were active participants in daily life, mediators between the spiritual and physical world. The Moai's features were intentionally exaggerated to reflect both idealized ancestry and divine authority. The deep-set eyes, high cheekbones, and long noses were visual metaphors for wisdom, strength, and sacred lineage. The long ears may have symbolized the elite class, while the statue's stoic expressions evoked a calm, eternal vigilance. Some moai were also topped with large red stone top knots called pukau, quarried from a different volcanic site, Punapau. These cylinder-shaped additions may have represented hairstyles or ceremonial headdresses, further marking status and reverence. Originally, the statues also had inlaid coral eyes with obsidian or red scoria pupils, giving them a far more lifelike and intense presence than the empty eye sockets seen today. When the eyes were added during ceremonies, the Moai were said to see for the first time, transforming from stone to sacred. The inland gaze of the Moai reveals the heart of Rapa Nui spirituality. These statues were never built for outsiders. They were built for the people, facing their descendants, silently watching generation after generation come and go, immovable, unblinking, eternal. How do you move a 30-foot, 8-eaten stone statue without wheels, cranes, or metal tools across miles of rough terrain? For centuries, this was the great riddle of Rapa Nui. The island's moai are scattered across vast distances, with many placed on stone ahu platforms far from the quarry at Rano. Early theories included dragging them on wooden sledges or rolling them on logs, ideas that raised even more questions, especially considering the island's deforestation. Others, more fanciful, suggested alien intervention or levitation through spiritual power. But the true answer may lie in the island's own oral history. According to Rapa Nui legend, the Moai walked to their destinations. At first glance, this sounds like myth. But in recent years, researchers have taken this idea literally and successfully. In 2012, archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo conducted a remarkable experiment. Using ropes and teams of people positioned on each side of a replica moai, they managed to rock the statue forward in a controlled, upright manner, like shimmying a heavy refrigerator. The key was balance, rhythm, and coordination. In this way, the moai could have been transported standing up, just as the legends described. No logs, no dragging, no science fiction, just human ingenuity and tradition. The base of many moai also supports this theory. They have curved bottoms, flat in back, rounded in front, suggesting they were designed to tilt and pivot forward, not lie down. This movement method would have required large teams, ropes made of plant fiber, and most of all, faith. In Rapa Nui spirituality, the power to move the moai was attributed to mana, the sacred energy of the ancestors. Chiefs and priests were believed to command this spiritual force, which could animate the statues during rituals. So while engineers see physics, the Rapa Nui saw the divine at work. In truth, both were right. Transporting moai was not merely an engineering challenge, it was a ceremonial act, a public performance of unity, devotion, and ancestral connection. The moai didn't move by magic. They moved because people believed they had to. And in that belief, Rapa Nui's greatest engineering marvel was not stone. It was human cooperation driven by spiritual purpose. As centuries passed, The building of Moai didn't slow down, it accelerated. The early harmony of Rapa Nui's clans gave way to increasing rivalry, as each group sought to honor its ancestors with larger, more imposing statues. What began as spiritual tribute gradually evolved into a competitive tradition of monumental pride. Clans vied for dominance not through warfare, but through stone craftsmanship. Bigger Moai meant more mana, more prestige, and a stronger claim to ancestral power. Each clan sought to outdo the others, erecting taller statues, adding new features, and developing more elaborate ceremonial platforms. The race wasn't just about size, it was about spiritual superiority. This competition led to significant innovations. The introduction of pukau, large redstone top knots carved from the volcanic stone at Punapau, added both height and symbolic weight. These top knots, some weighing up to 12 tons, may have represented hairstyles worn by high-ranking chiefs or sacred headdresses, visual reminders of divine favor. Moai design also evolved. Early statues were relatively short and wide, but over time they grew slimmer, more angular, and dramatically taller. Some of the later Moai exceeded 30 feet in height, towering over villages like ancestral titans, but this escalation came at a cost. To support the growing construction efforts, the island's forests were cut down, timber possibly used for food cultivation, fuel, building canoes, and, according to older theories, statue transportation. As tree cover vanished, soil erosion worsened, agricultural yields declined, and freshwater sources became harder to manage. The very resources that supported the Moai culture were slowly being exhausted. And yet the people didn't stop. Instead, they carved more statues, larger ones. They dug deeper into spiritual traditions, hoping the ancestors would restore balance. But the balance was already tipping. As the island's ecology deteriorated, tensions between clans began to simmer. Competition turned to resentment. The collaborative spirit that had once moved giants was cracking under the strain of survival. The golden age of Moai building had become a burden, but to stop building was unthinkable. The Moai were more than symbols. They were the heartbeat of Rapa Nui's identity. So the islanders continued, carving devotion from stone even as the earth beneath them thinned. A spiritual arms race was underway, and no one could afford to lose. By the 17th century, the unthinkable had happened. Rapa Nui was unraveling. The very system that had once unified the island, ancestor worship through Moai construction, had pushed its resources to the breaking point. The forests were gone, without trees. There were no canoes for deep-sea fishing, no wood to build or cook, and no shelter from the island's harsh sun and winds. The rich volcanic soil, once protected by roots and shade, had eroded. Crops withered, freshwater became scarce, and yet, even as survival became difficult, the statues kept coming, larger, more elaborate, more demanding of labor. The spiritual engine of the island had no brakes, but soon the people did something drastic. They stopped erecting the Moai. Some statues were abandoned mid-transport, left lying along ancient roads like forgotten giants. Others were half-finished at the quarry, their chisels frozen in time. The spiritual arms race had reached its limit. The ancestors could no longer provide what the earth could not sustain. Then came the topplings. Archaeological evidence shows that, beginning in the late 1600s, Moai across the island were deliberately pushed over. Their necks snapped, their faces shattered. This wasn't the work of nature. It was human conflict. Clans began warring over land, water, and prestige. The very statues that once embodied unity became targets of revenge and rage. Oral traditions describe this period as the Huri Moai, the time of statue toppling. With faith in the Moai system collapsing, power shifted toward a new spiritual political order. The Birdman cult, which emphasized agility, competition, and ritual warfare over ancestral mana. This cultural upheaval marked the end of an era. By the time the first European visitors arrived in 1722, they found an island society vastly different from the one that had carved the Moai. None of the statues were standing on their platforms. The once vibrant spiritual system was broken, and the people were struggling to survive in a deforested, divided land. The downfall of Rapa Nui wasn't caused by a single event. It was a slow-motion collapse, triggered by environmental exhaustion, social competition, and a spiritual system that couldn't adapt quickly enough. What remained were toppled gods in stone, staring up at the sky, as if asking how it all went wrong. When Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen arrived on Easter Sunday in 1722, he found a society that had already endured collapse. The Moai stood toppled. The forests were gone. The Rapa Nui people were few in number, thin, wary, and weathered by generations of hardship. Roggeveen's men noted the statues and the barren landscape, but failed to understand the civilization that had created them. And then the outsiders kept coming. Over the next 2 centuries, European contact brought devastation to Rapa Nui. Whalers, missionaries, traders, and slavers arrived, each leaving their own mark, and most of them erasing more than they recorded. In 1862, Peruvian slave raiders kidnapped nearly 1,500 Rapa Nui people, including the high chiefs and scribes. Only a handful ever returned. Along with them came smallpox, which spread like fire among the survivors. Worse still was the arrival of Christian missionaries, who sought to civilize the islanders. They banned traditional rituals, destroyed sacred carvings, and forced conversions, often replacing Moai-centered spiritual life with imported European practices. The oral traditions that had preserved the island's history for centuries were suppressed, and a written language, Rongo, possibly the only indigenous script in Oceania, was all but lost. By the late 19th century, the island's population had fallen to just over 100 people. Colonial powers carved up Rapa Nui's land and leased it as sheep pasture, fencing off ancestral sites and confining the Rapa Nui people to a small corner of the island. Even their ability to access the Moai was restricted. The statues, once living symbols of family and power, became silent monuments, neglected, looted, or treated as curiosities for foreign explorers and collectors. European archaeologists removed statues, ceremonial items, and even human remains, shipping them to museums in London, Paris, and Santiago. Some Moai were cut at the base and taken whole, now displayed thousands of miles from their sacred homes. The island had become a case study in cultural erasure, but the Rapa Nui people never forgot who they were, even in forced silence. They carried the memory of the Moai. The traditions endured, hidden, whispered, passed down in fragments, and slowly, over the centuries, the people would begin to reclaim the stories carved in stone. But first, the world had to learn to listen. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Rapa Nui began a slow but determined process of cultural revival and reclamation. The Moai, once toppled and buried by time, conflict, and neglect, were gradually raised again, this time not just as monuments of the past, but as symbols of resilience. In the 1950s, famed Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl brought international attention to Easter Island. Though many of his theories were flawed, especially his ideas about South American influence, his work helped spark archaeological interest and global curiosity. Researchers from around the world descended upon the island, not to plunder as before, but to study and restore. Restoration efforts began in earnest. Fallen Moai were re-erected on their ahu platforms. Coral eyes were reconstructed. Pukao topknots were returned. The island's ancient roads, quarries, and ceremonial sites were mapped and studied. A clearer picture of the Rapa Nui civilization began to emerge. Not one of mystery, but of engineering brilliance, spiritual depth, and cultural complexity. But the most important voices were no longer those of foreign scholars. They were the Rapa Nui people themselves. Descendants of the original builders began reclaiming their language, rituals, and land rights. In 2017, Chile formally transferred control of Rapa Nui National Park, which includes most of the island's archaeological sites. Back to the Rapa Nui community. Now, locals oversee the Moai and their care, and decisions about excavation and preservation are made with cultural sensitivity and ancestral knowledge. New generations are learning the stories of their ancestors, not just from textbooks, but from elders, chants, dances, and the Moai themselves. Efforts to decipher Rongorongo, the island's mysterious script, continue with cautious optimism, and global institutions, including the British Museum and the Louvre, face increasing pressure to return Moai and sacred artifacts taken during the colonial period. Today, Rapa Nui stands at a crossroads between memory and modernity. Tourists arrive in waves, and economic development brings both opportunity and risk. Yet the people continue to protect their heritage, not as a frozen relic, but as a living tradition. The Moai no longer serve as silent guardians over a lost world. They now bear witness to survival, to a culture that endured collapse, colonization, and erasure, and still found a way to rise again. Stone cracked, forests burned, voices silenced. But the ancestors still stand. What an incredible journey, from the heights of a unique civilization to its near collapse and now a powerful rebirth. The story of Rapa Nui and its Moai is a profound lesson in human ingenuity, spirituality, and the delicate balance between culture and environment. What aspect of the Moai or the Rapa Nui people's history do you find most compelling or mysterious? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this voyage to Easter Island. If this story of stone giants and enduring spirit captivated you, please hit that like button, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications so you don't miss our next exploration into the fascinating mysteries of our world. Until then, keep wondering and stay curious.